Okay, so our objective today is to factor a monomial out of an expression. And you probably heard the word factor before. It's when you take something and you break it down into the things that multiply into that. So 56 breaks down into 8 times 7, and then 8 also breaks down into 4 times 2, and then 4 breaks down into 2 times 2. This process is called factorization, and each of these things that you get is called a factor. So you're going to hear this word factor a lot, both as a noun and as a verb. You can similarly do it with something like this, 6x cubed. If you break this down into the things that multiply to it, well, 6 breaks down into 3 times 2, and then x cubed breaks down into x times x times x. So 6x cubed factorized is 3 times 2 times x times x times x. Each of these things is called a factor. The process is factorization. Now, that's pretty easy when you just have one term by itself. It gets just slightly more complicated when you're looking at an expression like this. So we've got 5x squared plus 15x minus 40. And I want to break this entire expression down into the two things that multiplied to give us this. The way we think about it is that we look at each term in the expression and we think to ourselves, well, what one component do they have in common? So 5x squared has a 5 and 2 x's. 15x has a 3 and a 5, which make 15, and 1x. And then 40 has, well, 40 breaks down into 8 times 5, and then 8 breaks down into 4 times 2, and then another 2 times 2. And really what you should notice pretty quickly is that each of these has a 5 in them. So the monomial that we're going to factor out is just 5. That's the only thing that all three of these have in common. And the way we write that is whatever the common factor is, you write that in front of an entire set of parentheses. I'm going to change color here. I want you to notice that this term is going to end up right there. This term is going to end up right there. And this term is going to end up right there, except that all of them will have the 5 that was in them removed. So if you have 5x squared and you divide out a 5, you just have x squared. If you have 15x, remember that 15 was a 3 and a 5, and you divide out a 5, now you just have a 3 and an x. And since there's a plus here, there will still be a plus. So this is plus 3x. And then minus 40, well, that 40 was an 8 and a 5. The 5 has now been divided out, so the only thing that's left is an 8. That's it. I know it doesn't quite look like this, but it really is. Do you see how this was 3 times 2 times x times x times x? Well, what we have now is 5 times this whole expression. So these two things are the two factors of that expression. 5 and then x squared plus 3x minus 8. If you would like to check your work, you can distribute, which you're probably pretty good at, and that 5 would then multiply to all three of these terms. And what that gives us, 5 times x squared is 5x squared. My handwriting's getting bad. 5 times 3x is 15x. And then 5 times negative 8 is negative 40. And that's the same thing we started with, so we know we got this right. I'm going to do this one more time if you would like to see another example. This one looks a little more complicated, but it's the same basic idea. I've got 3 terms. And then I have to think to myself, what do they all have in common? Well, let's see. This one has a 2 in it. 18 has a 2 in it, 30 has a 2 in it, so I can factor out a 2. This has an x, this has an x, but this doesn't have an x, so I can't factor out an x because not every term has an x in it. This has 3 y's, this has 1 y, and this has 2 y's. Well, I can't factor out 2 y's because the middle term doesn't have it. I can't factor out 3 y's because the second and third term don't have it. The most I could factor out is a single y, because every term has at least 1 y in it. So we'll do that. We'll put in our parentheses. Negative 2xy cubed, if we divide out a single 2 and a single y, it leaves us with negative xy squared. Negative 18xy, if we divide out a 2 and we divide out a y, leaves us with negative 9x. And then 30y squared, if we divide out a 2 and we divide out a y, leaves us with plus 15y. You could have decided to take out to divide out a negative as well, and then all these would have changed signs. And that's optional. That's not as there's no consensus about whether it's better to take out a negative or not in a case like this. So that is it. Our objective was factoring a monomial out of an expression.